In the spring of 1806, the two brothers took their first decisive step. Eager to establish a center for the new movement and to reassert the Shawnee claim to homelands already ceded by treaty, they moved their village to a new site in western Ohio, on the American side of the line established by the Treaty of Greenville 10 years earlier, in open defiance of the American government. Then sent out messengers to villages across the region, often led by Tecumseh himself.
The Shawnees have heretofore been scattered about in parties, which we have found has been attended with bad consequences. We are now going to gather them all together to one town, that one chief may keep them in good order and prevent sickness, want, and shame from coming among them.
Initially, Tecumseh remains in the prophet's shadow. We know that he's aware of his brother's transformation. We know that the brother lives in, quote, Tecumseh's village. But it is the prophet that first attracts the tribal people to the village.
From the start, the new movement sent shockwaves surging through Indian country, unsettling native communities already rocked by decades of change, and deeply dividing the Shawnees themselves, along with other worn-down tribes like the Delawares and the Wyandots.
The Shawnee chiefs in Ohio saw power struggle in it. Straight away they saw this is a man from the junior division of the Shawnees bidding for power, and we're damn well not going to give it to him.
Even within Tecumseh's own nation, there are Shawnees who are now trying to follow the white man's path, who are following the lead of Blackhoof, who is a person who had fought against the Americans through the Revolution up until the Treaty of Greenville, but now as an older man is saying, we fought, we've tried that way, it's not working, we need to try this way.
In April 1806, eager to win more recruits from among the troubled tribes in Ohio and Indiana, Tenskwatawa issued a direct challenge to any leaders who opposed him, accusing them of witchcraft and of being in league with the U.S. government.
He essentially engaged in a series of high-profile confrontations with their leaders to the point where he enters into a Wyandot village and engages in a ritualized killing of a Wyandot leader. He essentially accused him and others like him of being a witch, of attempting to undermine them by acting as a kind of wedge for Americans to enter their communities and harm their people. And so people begin to see him as an iconoclast of sorts, who's willing to take on government chiefs who are in the pay of the United States, and his message spreads like wildfire as a result.
In late April, as a wave of fear and unease rippled through white communities in southern Indiana, the territorial governor, William Henry Harrison, fired off a letter to the Delawares, denouncing the Shawnee prophet as an impostor and urging them to put his supposed powers to the test.
My children, who is this pretended prophet who dares to speak in the name of the great Creator? Examine him. Demand of him some proof, at least, of his being the messenger of the deity. If he's really a prophet, ask him to cause the sun to stand still, the moon to alter its courses, the river to cease to flow, or the dead to rise from their graves. If he does these things, you may believe he is sent from God. Otherwise, drive him from your town, and let peace and harmony prevail amongst you.
And in June 1806, the Shawnee prophet predicts an eclipse of the sun called a black sun by the Shawnees, which is a sign of great things to come, a sign of great change. And at first, many Shawnees, many other Indians said, oh, this time I don't really think he's able to do it.
Did I not speak the truth? See now, the sun is dark.
And the eclipse was so complete that the farm animals, for example, went into the sheds, the birds roosted, etc. And the prophet's stock after this just rose like a skyrocket. William Henry Harrison could not have done anything that helps the prophet and propels the prophet in Tecumseh to a position of prominence more than issuing this challenge.
As news of the miracle spread, the trickle of pilgrims coming into Greenville swelled to a flood. By July, Ojibwe villages on the shores of Lake Superior stood empty and deserted. To the south, Potawatomis left corn crops standing in the fields and came to hear the Shawnee holy man, whose words now, with each passing month, seemed to grow in stridency and power.
My children, the Great Spirit bids me say to you thus: have very little to do with the Americans. They are unjust. They have taken away your lands which were not made for them. The whites I have placed on the other side of the great water to be another people separate from you. In time, I will overturn the land so that all the white people will be covered. And you alone shall inhabit the land.
And the U.S. government panics, and the fear really proliferates. Because by 1807, certainly, I think most Americans just assumed an orderly process of dispossession and conquest in which Native Americans would gradually recede from the picture or assimilate into American society. And when Tenskwatawa has his vision, all of a sudden 10 years of confidence erodes as Native people reconsider and attempt to reorganize themselves in an effective way against Jefferson's vision of land loss and dispossession.
Now events began to accelerate. In the spring of 1807, the Indian agent at Fort Wayne, William Wells, alarmed by the upturn in Indians passing through his outpost, accused the prophet of keeping settlers in a continual state of uneasiness, he said, and demanded he leave Greenville. That June, convinced that English agents operating out of Canada were egging the Indians on to war, William Henry Harrison fired off a letter to the Secretary of War. I really fear, he wrote, that this said prophet is an engine set to work by the British for some bad purpose. In the fall of 1808, as the war of words grew louder, the two brothers decided to move their center of operations to a new site, 150 miles west, strategically located near the junction of the Wabash and Tippecanoe rivers, deep in Indiana territory. Far away from prying white eyes, they hoped, and closer to the western tribes that had been most receptive to the prophet's message to begin with. The new village, called Prophetstown, would rise to become one of the greatest centers of Indian resistance on the North American continent. It would also become a major obstacle to the dreams of statehood nurtured by William Henry Harrison, who in 1809 redoubled his efforts to drive the Indians from Indiana, bribing local chiefs into signing away lands over which they had no authority, and pressing one land cession after another through the territorial legislature, culminating in the notorious Treaty of Fort Wayne in the autumn of 1809.
The Treaty of Fort Wayne really changes everything. And the politics comes to the fore. Here's 3 million acres of Indian land suddenly snatched away. And white settlements are moving closer than ever before to Prophetstown. And suddenly there is a need for a very urgent political action.